All right, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in for this presentation on this, if you're in Chicago, gloomy Tuesday morning. Hope we're going to jump right in here, talk a little bit about how managing your risk, meeting today's security expectations, and again, from us being working with a lot of law firms and legal professionals, how do we make sure that you're as defensible as possible so that you're not deemed negligent to your end users, right? And really to kind of just start it all off, right? I think we've come to a point in this world where, nowadays we run into just so much noise, right? There's so much in the news. There's in the point of when in regards to security expectations, you hear about all types of incidents that are occurring, specifically data incidents, right? And these are the incidents that are you hear on the news commonly, right? And I'm going to talk about a couple of big brands, kind of that started as like the ground zero of these type of incidents. And first one that probably those who are in attendance that know about is Target, well over 10 years ago. That really was the ground zero for retail. I think that was the point where in that year we would consistently get a new debit or credit card in the mail because of some type of breach that occurred. A couple years after that, or several years after that, we had the big Equifax hack, and that was a big thing where they just didn't update their systems, and it led to a lot of data exposure to their systems and quite frankly, one of the biggest compromises in quite some time after that, at that point. And then you have major other big brands like LinkedIn a couple years ago, where they had a compromise in their settings, in their systems, exposing data from everyday users like myself and you. But again, I know I talk about big brands, and I'm highlighting this because this is really what you tend to hear in the news. This is where you hear in the media and where you get your input from the media and news. But oftentimes, I always hear from a lot of either colleagues, professionals, other prospects that we discuss, and they just say, Paco, that just makes sense. Sure, that's they're going after the bigger brands. Why does that matter for me? Right? I'm too small, I'm local, I don't really have anything that they need to take from me, so I'm okay. And so, for me, I went through, for the sake of the webinar, and did some research on local firms that were actually exposed and had some type of data incident that occurred, right? And I'm using the word data incident specifically because, as you all probably know or may not know, data breach is a legal term. And for us, we are not a legal firm. We support legal firms just like yourselves. So for us, when referring to data incidents, it's a lot more encompassing of a lot of the details and things that occur with your data when it's those that are either harboring your data, monitoring your data, or quite frankly, stewards of your data, and making sure that they are doing the best practices and best case scenarios for those things. And so one of those firms from this past, or not this past, but last year, February, there was a civil litigation firm locally here in Chicago, and they were listed as a ransomware victim. And the data that was exposed from them, I mean, it ranged from legal documents, client data, employee data, financial records, video recordings that were tied to active cases, and this was very detriment to that firm. Another firm not too far away had a similar situation where they had unauthorized network access when it comes to, you know, the personal data that was sitting on their network, and someone had the ability to see who was associated with that law firm's legal services. It affected individuals, and those affected individuals were notified just to ensure that, hey, we did have some type of cause of an incident. Here's what's going on. And it's the due diligence and making sure that they are the good stewards of the data to notify their clients. Now, this next one kind of hits a little bit more on why this should kind of matter to you as far as dollars and cents and why this is a thing. And the first part about this is, there was a Chicago media coverage on this firm. And what occurred was they had a cybersecurity incident. The law firm data was breached, unfortunately, leading to a class action lawsuit. I think everyone here is well aware of what a class action lawsuit is. And Unfortunately, because of the class action lawsuit, obviously there's a lot more of those records or clients that were affected, right? And the biggest piece to understand about this is when it comes to a class action lawsuit or litigation, there's usually a settlement and there's usually requirements that are required of that firm or that business. One of those is that you are required to provide credit monitoring for that individual that is affected for 12 months or for the year. Now, right now, credit monitoring is averaging about anywhere between 15, between 15 to $17, but roughly about $180 a year. Now, if you use that on a small, let's say you have a clientele base of 1,000 clients, you already are well into the $180,000 for credit monitoring alone that you are responsible for. Now, that's just on the credit monitoring alone. There are those other, depending on the regulatory bodies that you report to, there are oftentimes, because of the deemed negligence, there are fines and there are actual fees that are associated to this. And I think the important piece to this is I'm often greeted with is, well, I have insurance. I have cyber insurance. This will take care of it for me. To date, to my knowledge, and speaking with some of our commercial risk partners, the insurance will not cover the fines of a regulatory body. They'll cover some of these things and for the investigation and forensics and things of that nature, but specifically fines that are adhered to you, they do not cover those. And so that's going to be a big detriment to your firm as well, right? Now, I've been talking about a little bit of data or a lot of data, a lot of stats, things of that nature, but I have a little bit of an activity for you all to do. And there is a website called Have I Been Pwned? It's a play on Have I Been Pawned? You see the website on the bottom there, it haveibnpwned.com. I would love for you to take a couple minutes right now, head to the website, enter your email address. And what this website does is it highlights if your email was in part of a data incident or a data breach over the last X amount of years. So I'm going to go ahead and wait a couple minutes. I want you to go ahead, jump on the website, type in your email address, see how many breaches and data incidents that you have been involved with on your specific email address. So I'll wait a couple minutes here, have you check that out, and we're going to go ahead and reconvene here in a minute. And then I do implore you, if you see results, click on the details on those, and I'll explain why in a minute. All right. So hopefully you've entered it in. You kind of scrolled down. Maybe you're clicking onto some details of things. What you're looking at is a timeline of when these incidents occurred, right? Some of these things are, and hopefully you typed in your work email for this, right? And you can do both personal and work, but the work email is specifically what we want to do about for today. But this will help you understand kind of where your information was found through these details and through these pieces, right? And this will allow you to understand that there are different types of information that they are either exposed or that you have that's out there. Now, each breach or data incident is different. It could be personal information like addresses, name, birthday, while others could be passwords that you've used, other secure items. Okay. Now, the question often I get is why? Why is my information out there? What is happening? Why does this happen? Right? And really you're entering your digital footprint. Your digital footprint is kind of the new digital gold for bad actors nowadays, right? And really what makes up your digital footprint is information about you. So things you share on social media, forms and websites that you're filling out, emails and newsletters you're subscribing to, browsing, and then there are the information shared through your actions, but importantly, information shared by others. So other things like maybe your colleagues and friends are mentioning you, tagging you, reviews. There are data brokers that are collecting this data from other partners. There are fine prints on some of these agreements that you sign up for certain services. I won't name any of the big ones, but the big thing about those is there are data brokers that are culminating this data, such as White Pages, Spokio. There are a few others that harbor this data for cost. As we saw from Have I Been Pwned, breach exposed data, public records. Again, this is your digital footprint that is permanent and is continually to expand. Now, there's two versions that you can look at this, right? For you yourself, there is a website that you can go to, and that is calc.utm.org, I believe. I'll make sure that when we publish this video, that we'll have it in the show notes for you all. That's for personal. And what that website will do is it will calculate how much is your data worth to that business. So the Googles of the world, other franchises, social media, things of that nature. And each one can calculate of how much information you've shared with this avenue. And it will allow you to see how much you are worth to those companies. But I kind of want to take it a different approach. I want to show you specifically what does your digital footprint cost or worth to bad actors on the dark web. And so for those that don't know the dark web, think of it as kind of like an underground eBay store, and bad actors are bidding and buying things, in that realm. It's not accessible readily on the internet. They have their ways to kind of dump in there. If you don't know what dark web is, I would implore you to reach out to your IT professional so they can help educate you a little bit on what dark web is and what does that matter to you. But again, some of that is those public breach in public data incidents tie into some of that items. But this is from Experian from this past June, June 2025, on what your data is worth to a bad actor on the dark web and where they can purchase these data. And again, they can purchase these data from your digital footprint that exposed this information and allowed for it to be available in some way, shape, or form. And as you can see, some of these are nominal, others are pretty high up there. But again, this is one person that this would cost for on the average price. These bad actors, hackers, they are going through, sifting through millions of records, hoping that they can get into and access any of these items so that they can go ahead and get a piece of the payday for them. Now, I don't have the updated stat for this, but I do recall once I started talking about credentials and data worth and dark web, that business where they either are ransomware or exploitation or things of that nature, they have specifically, that industry at the time was a $10 billion industry. I believe it's much higher now from when we last looked at that stat. But for 10 billion, everyone's trying to get a piece of that billion. And as you can see, the more that they can rack up, and they're constantly sifting through millions and millions of data, people's information now is where they're trying to strike digital gold. So again, this is about you personally, how this makes sense. What does that mean for cyber risk and for your firm, right? So I want to flip the tables, right? I want to be able to talk a little bit about how do we become good stewards of your client's data? You see how it affects you. Now, how can we make sure that it doesn't affect our clients? Because they're going through some of the similar things, or if not the same things that we are, but also we are harboring some of their data as well. Now, this graphic is basically highlighting a stat where 56% of law firms that experience a breach lose confidential client data. Now, again, this is to highlight specifically that cyber incidents are not just an IT problem. They directly impact the client attorney privilege and, quite frankly, the firm's survival, right? And what are some of those data? Again, these are client files, right? Some of the questions that you should be asking yourself is, are they on SharePoint? Are they on Google Drive? Are they online? Are they on a server? When was the last time you audited the permissions associated to those places, to those locations? Have you confirmed your invoices are sent to the proper location? Have you reconfirmed with your vendors, your partners, Are invoices being received? Or are they being monitored correctly? Do you have the process? Do you have a process, or do you have some type of framework, a procedure where if a big payment or some type of financial change, such as a company emailing you for an ACH change, um, a company or a client that's asking for a wire that you normally would send, but now they asked for they have a different contact. There's different information. Do you have something in place to verify other than taking for the word of how that communication came to you? I mean, there's so many avenues now that they are taking advantage of, and by they, the bad actors, of how are you really verifying where that money is going, and in partial, making sure that it is ending up to where it's got to go. We had a client where um, for some reason, and this is right at the beginning of when we had took them over. When we took them on, they were mentioning that how they had sent out invoices to their client. I'm sorry, reverse. Invoices were coming into our clients, had the right invoice numbers of the vendor that they had purchased materials from every single time. Apparently 2 months went by from previous to us coming on, and it was about 60 days. So when we came on to kind of take a look at what was going on, it seemed from our investigation that that vendor that was sending invoices to the client had been compromised. And what they did was they were able to actually look at, mimic the invoice numbers that were being received, sent over to our client. They went ahead and verified that invoice was the proper invoice. When they verified it back with the client, payment was sent. Then they confirmed that those invoices were somehow duplicated, and it was just a huge mess to the point where they just lost out on, I think it was something somewhere up towards 60 to $70,000. And the vendor was saying, "Where is our payment?" And our client was saying, "Well, we sent the payment." And so that was a fun onboarding when we took them on and trying to unravel everything to the point of understanding that not everything is a technology situation, but is there a process that's being put in place as well, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But the last piece I want to mention is ID credentials. And this is, and I'm a big stickler on this one, right? Where are you storing your passwords, right? Hopefully, and we'll dive into this, that you're using something of a secure manner to store your passwords. I don't mean a sticky note. I don't mean an Excel sheet that has a password. Hopefully, it's not a notepad that's on your desktop. If so, hopefully, I'll give you some options here that you can go ahead and use. But there are some principles that we want to apply before that. And we want to make sure that specifically we don't go into the side of how are we ensuring that we are good stewards of data, not only of our own, but for our clients, right? Because these are easy avenues for someone to take a look at your firm's digital footprint, your digital data, and use it to their advantage. Now, for us, there's three pillars that we want to, and as a framework, as a step-by-step of how do you ensure that you are as defensible as possible so that you're not deemed negligent to your end user. We like to say it's something you remember, something you have, something you've learned, and then we'll go into, at the end, something that you to look into. And the first thing we're going to go into is something you know / maybe remember, and that's passwords. Okay. Now, passwords is a dry subject. I understand. Yes, we need to be better at just really at passwords. There's still a consistent issue where passwords are the number one notorious place that a bad actor will try to expose. Now, as you can see from previous examples and your search from that website from Have I Been Pwned, there's no doubt low-hanging fruit that you can take care of today. Now, how do we make it a bit harder for them to go ahead and address that? Do not reuse passwords. Each website should have a different password. Now, I get it that maybe you're using a password for one place. How does it relate to this other? Or maybe it's a personal password that you've used and you're using it in your work avenue. The two are separate. How would they know? As you saw from the exercise of haveibeenpwned.com, all of these data breaches and data incidents where they're gathering all of this data, they are sifting through all those millions of records in hopes that you reuse those passwords to places that matter. So let's say your Netflix password is the same as your social media password, or to your banking, or to something of that nature. They are trying to figure out how do they get closer to the place where they can monetize you as much as possible, whether they're going to sell your data or use your data to get money from somewhere else or somewhere onto someone else that will be taken advantage of. In the case of the scenario I just used, someone had their credentials taken out from what we assume is their financial system. And then they had access, duplicated invoicing to collect money, all because they probably had either a reused password, a phishing attempt of some sort. So again, ensure you're reusing passwords. Make sure that you use unique passwords. And I know this is oftentimes a hard thing to do because how do you remember all of these passwords? For us, we always suggest using either a song lyric, a book quote, a poem. That tends to help alleviate some of those, because the longer the password, it's harder to get into than would it be with multi-characters. And then most importantly, a password manager. If you don't know what a password manager is, there are plenty of good ones that are out there. Keeper is one that we use here. They are local to Chicago as well. There are others such as Bitwarden and several others. These are all different tools that allow you to keep all of your passwords in one place that's agnostic to any of the systems you're using. So if a laptop died, if your computer got corrupted, if you lost a phone, this will allow to kind of safe keep all of those passwords in place to make sure that it doesn't move forward, and you have those all kind of nicely set and you know where they are. Now, I will say, if you do move to a password manager and everything's good to go, please don't forget to delete the notepads, the Excel sheets, throw out the sticky notes, because I have had clients that say, yep, we're on a password manager, and we do our re-onboardings or we do a client visit and we see it right under the keyboard, we see it on the monitor. Make sure you do your due diligence and make sure that if you do make that transition, let's remove any of the remaining data that might cause some problems as well. The second pillar is something that you have or something you have on you. This is what you have heard called MFA or 2FA, multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication. This is the annoying text message that you will get when you log into a bank, to another secure site that goes to your phone. Or if your IT professional has set it up for you, you'll have some type of software that will allow you to either click approve or allow after you've typed in your password. Think of this as kind of like a second layer of your password to prevent someone gaining access. So if you don't know what this is, there are several different ways to implement this. The common devices to use a 2FA is software apps on your phone. So if you're a Google Workspace user, Google Authenticator. If you're a Microsoft user, Microsoft Authenticator. And then there are others as well that may be provided to you by your IT professional, or that are out there that maybe have vetted by your IT specific team. But these are ways to ensure that you have a second layer to allow, and you can verify that allow that to move forward with the access of that system. The second piece specifically is biometrics. I think we're at a point now where every device either has some type of eye recognition, sometimes a fingerprint reader of some sort. These are things that are related to several different type of systems. So Windows Hello, for those that are on Microsoft, that is a way of scanning your facial recognition or on a fingerprint on your laptop, if you so choose. There is a Face ID on specific on iPhones and Apple devices, and then you have the fingerprint readers and other biometrics that you have on the Google Android space as well. So these are all versions of a factor authentication to get into accessing some type of secure device or system that you have. Now, the third one is a little bit more techie. And so for those that may not hear, there are things called a FIDO or YubiKey. And what those are is it's basically looks like a USB drive. Let's say you don't want to use your personal phone, you don't want to do biometrics, but you want to have something on you. There's these little devices that you can actually connect into a USB drive, and that's what will authenticate that it's you to move forward with any of the secure systems, whether it's logging into your laptop, accessing a certain type of password manager, things of that nature, allows you to go ahead and access that as well. That takes a little bit more implementation. So if that is of interest, I do implore you, reach out to an IT professional or someone on your IT team to talk a little bit about YubiKeys and see if that's going to be a fit for you. Because again, sometimes staff or yourself may not want to include your personal devices if you have personal devices and not any corporate issued devices to your staff and employees or even your contractors as well. Our last pillar specifically is security awareness training. Now, this is our something you learn. Now, for those that have a business or may have been in corporate America before you started your firm, or those that are legal professionals that may have this, we hate trainings. It's important to ensure that we find something that is not only going to grab our attention, but sized to our learning progress. I have seen a lot of platforms where they are very dry, and sometimes you don't get the buy-in from your teams or the staff or members because they're just hoping to click next, next, next. And then especially those that have it for every year, and they keep it on an annual basis, it continues to have an issue where they're just not looking forward to it. So it's important to find great platforms that you can do this with and not to do it on your own, because this is a big undertaking that we have seen other clients where they will try to do this manually, whether that is going through some type of written version, having an instructor come in and grade and things of that nature. There's so much more automated and faster approaches nowadays. There are dedicated platforms that will allow you to do this, and some are built for the attention span in mind. And so some of those that we trust is Huntress. KnowBe4 are several partners of ours over at MSP Owners Group that provide this. We're a big fan of the Huntress Security Awareness platform. A lot of our clients have used that, where that specific platform has 20-minute animated videos, but it continues with a story, and it then comes down to the quizzes. And so the great part about that is that it only happens 1 or 2 videos a month, so you could spare 20 minutes, run through the process. But the important piece about this is that understanding that it keeps this front of mind. And why is that important? The reason why it's important is because we can put as much technology in place. We can do all kinds of, lock this down here, encrypt that, set this policy here. But you, as the user, or your staff or your team members as an individual, it has always been proven that, unfortunately, we are the weakest link. There is social engineering that occurs to cause us to not be able to see or view things as we have hoped to have seen in the past. And so for that, it's why this constant education is so necessary in the form of this type of platform, to really ensure that we can have the ability to not only keep these things front of mind, but even help out a colleague, or even in your personal life, being able to see something that you may have just ran through that training. We had a client that ran through their security awareness training that discussed on how bad actors were cloning Wi-Fi. And there was an incident where one of their patrons came in, stated that they had joined the Wi-Fi and that there was an issue in regards to some purchasing and things of that nature. When we went back, we went to look at the logs, and there was no connections by that user. We didn't see anything from on that side. But what was great about it was that the user then looked and said, you know what? We want to make sure that this wasn't a cloned Wi-Fi. I was like, oh, interesting. Cloned Wi-Fi. What do you know about that? And in regards to that, happened to be the training module that was issued for that month. And it discussed on how to ensure that to stay diligent, using a VPN, things of that nature. And it opened up the conversation of, hey, how do we make sure that we are secure? How do we make sure that we continue to keep moving forward so we have the ability on just protecting ourselves, and again, being good stewards of not only the data that we are protected and trusted with, but ensuring that we help educate ourselves to those that we can pass it on as well. Not only will this keep it front of mind, but again, it helps with a lot of those data incidents that would occur in the future. Now, a lot of information, and this wasn't meant to be a lengthy presentation, but hopefully to bring to you a lot of value. We understand your time is important. And again, on our three specific pillars we've mentioned is passwords, MFA, security awareness training, something you know, something you have, something you want to learn. But I did forget to mention there is one other thing, is something to look into. And one of those things are, and I kind of highlighted it earlier in the presentation, is, you know, have you taken a look at the permissions that you have provided on sharing data? And I'm referring to files and data that you've shared with partners, vendors, clients. When's the last time that you've done a full audit to see who and where have you shared these things over the years, and how have you shared them? And what do I mean by that? Were you sharing these things with a link and you were passing links around versus sharing it to their email address? Is there anyone that you were doing business with that you're no longer doing business with that may still have access to some of the data that you may have shared to them? Are you ensure that those policies are in place for expiration of dates and things of that nature? These are things that by no means do we believe that, we do implore you to do an audit, and do that, and make sure to speak with someone from your IT team or an IT professional. But these are things that a professional can help with to audit your systems, but also put in the right things of mind. And again, by looking at these pillars and being able to look at your digital footprint, safeguarding your digital footprint for not only for yourself, but for your firm, will lead you to a point where you're doing much more than what those may just be hoping. And hope is never a plan, to ensure that, again, managing those expectations, managing the security risks. And importantly, again, I continue to keep using this phrase because this is a phrase that resonates with those in our legal clients, is how do we ensure that we are defensible as possible so that we're not deemed negligent by our clients, by our partners, even those who we're using for our vendors and commercial risk, to make sure that we're doing the best that we can with our best foot forward. I did skip, the introduction to myself because I wanted to jump right into the information, but that was not done. That was done intentionally. My name is Paco Lebron. I am the founder and CEO of ProdigyTeks. We are a Chicago-based IT company. I'm also the CEO of MSP Owners Group that oversees ProdigyTeks and our sister company over at Cool Technology Group. But for us here, again, we founded the business to ensure that we take away the headache and making sure that, you don't have to deal with unmanaged and unreliable IT. Same thing goes for those that are tuning in from Houston or in the Houston land area. My good colleague, Chris Cool over at Cool Technology Group, he follows in the same path as us. Again, we're all under the MSP Owners Group umbrella. And again, for those that are in the local, if you have not spoken or do not know Mr. Chris Cool, I implore you, just as a contact, as a communication, reach out to him. The gentleman is not only just filled with a lot of wise words, but he's just a great spirit to know. And if you're in a pinch, he's the man to help you out with his team over there as well. And we will see you for the next webinar series, and that will be announced too. Make sure you subscribe over on the website so you can stay in the know.